Welcome back to the deep dive. So we're in part 3 of this series on brain sex.
Yeah.
And if you've been following along, you know we've kind of built this biological machine from the ground up.
You started in the womb, right? Then puberty.
Exactly. Puberty, then we parked it in the garage of marriage last time.
And today we're taking it out of the garage and putting it on the racetrack.
The modern workplace. And honestly, looking at the source material for this one, this is where the friction seems to be, the hottest. Because we look at the corporate world, the boardrooms, the engineering firms, the C-suites, and we see a lot of men. And the standard cultural narrative is that this is purely the result of a glass ceiling.
Right. The story we all hear is that it's all about external barriers, discrimination, sexism, the whole boys club thing.
Yeah.
And to be clear, the sources aren't saying those things don't exist at all, but they are asking a much more uncomfortable question.
They're asking if what we call the glass ceiling is maybe a glass wall.
A glass wall. A wall built not by men to keep women out, but one that women themselves build based on their own biological preferences.
That's the thesis that makes everyone squirm, right?
It is. The argument here is that men and women aren't just physically different. They have fundamentally different operating systems when it comes to motivation, what they want out of a career.
How they define success.
Exactly. So the clash we see in the office isn't just about power, it's about a clash of biological values.
Okay, but hold on. That sounds a lot like biological determinism. It feels like you're saying women just aren't wired for the big jobs, which, that's a pretty dangerous slope.
It is.
So how do the sources back that up without just, relying on stereotypes?
That's the right skepticism to have. And the sources, they anticipate that. They don't just use anecdotes. They point to what they call the laboratory of life.
Right.
Specifically, they look at the Israeli kibbutz movement as this massive real-world control group.
I've heard of the kibbutz, but more in the context of, farming or something.
Yeah.
Why is it relevant to gender in the workplace?
Because the entire point of the kibbutz movement was to be this utopian socialist project where they tried to hit reset on human nature.
A reset.
Their explicit goal was to erase gender roles completely. They saw the nuclear family as a capitalist trap. They wanted to prove that if you treat boys and girls exactly the same from birth, they turn out, interchangeable.
Because they went all in on this.
Total social engineering. Unisex clothes, shared showers. The sources mention kids were raised in these communal children's houses, not even by their parents.
Wow.
And they actively discouraged traditional play. If a little girl picked up a doll, they'd hand her a toy tractor. If a boy wanted to wrestle, they'd send him to the laundry.
That is fascinating. It's like the ultimate blank slate experiment, isn't it?
It really is.
So, okay, this goes on for decades. Did it work? Did they get their gender-neutral utopia?
Nature won. That's the blunt assessment from the sociologists in the source material. Despite all this intense social pressure to be the same, as soon as the kibbutzniks were old enough to actually choose their own work assignments, they reverted to type.
And when you say reverted, are we talking like a slight lean or a hard split?
A hard split. The women gravitated back to education, to caregiving, service, even the laundry jobs that were people-oriented, community-focused.
And the men?
The men went to the machinery, agriculture, security, and politics. Thing-oriented or power-oriented jobs.
And the sources say the women actually fought to end the experiment. Is that right?
They did. They led the charge to dismantle the whole communal child-rearing thing because they wanted their kids back. They didn't want the quote-unquote freedom to be treated like men. They wanted the freedom to follow their own instincts.
This reminds me of that other point the sources make, this paradox of progress.
Yes.
You see it in places like Scandinavia today. You'd assume that in the countries with the most freedom, the most security, the strictest gender equality laws, you'd see a 50-50 split in every job.
That's the logical assumption, right? If you believe gender is just a social construct, you remove the barriers, the outcome should be equal.
But the data says otherwise.
It says the complete opposite. In the most progressive, wealthy societies, gender segregation in careers actually increases.
Wait, walk me through that. How does more freedom lead to more segregation?
Well, it makes perfect sense if you look at it through the lens of necessity versus choice.
Okay.
In a poorer country, a woman might become an engineer because she needs the money. She has to. She does what pays. But in, say, Sweden or Norway, where your basic needs are guaranteed, she's free to choose a career that actually satisfies her brain.
So when you take the economic gun away from their head, people default to their biological wiring.
Precisely. And for the female brain, generally speaking, that satisfaction comes from connection and people. For the male brain, it often comes from systems, objects, and abstract power.
Okay, so let's run with that for a minute, that the motivations are different. How does that actually play out when you put these two brains in an office together? Because the sources use this distinction of the game versus the life, and I found that really striking.
This is such a critical framework for understanding office politics. The hypothesis is that the male brain views the workplace fundamentally as a sport.
Like a game.
Like a high-stakes game of snakes and ladders or football. It's abstract, it has rules, boundaries, and a scoreboard.
And crucially, it involves depersonalization.
Yes, exactly. This is something women often find just baffling about men. A man can engage in ruthless competition, try to crush a colleague in a debate, and to him, it's just business.
He's not trying to hurt you personally.
No, he's just trying to win the game. He leaves it on the field. He doesn't go home and stress about it because it's not about him as a person. It's about his position on the board.
And in this game, money and status, those are the points.
That's the scoreboard. It's proof of victory. It's a pursuit of dominance, which, tracks right back to that testosterone wash we talked about.
But the female brain doesn't see it that way at all.
Not according to the sources. For the female brain, work is life. It's not some separate compartment you visit from 9 to 5. The argument is that women see their work as an extension of their identity and their web of relationships.
So they don't compartmentalize.
It's very difficult to, because that female brain is so interconnected. Remember the thicker corpus callosum. Office politics aren't a strategy game. Conflict is seen as a breakdown in relationships.
I can see how that would create huge misunderstandings. A guy plays the game, he undercuts a female colleague, and he thinks he just made a strategic move.
Right.
And she thinks he just severed a personal bond.
And she takes it personally because her brain is wired to prioritize the personal. This causes genuine stress for women in corporate environments that men often just don't even register.
And it changes the relationship with money, too.
Absolutely. The sources argue that for women, money is rarely a trophy. It's a tool. It buys security, freedom, well-being. But that burning need to have more than the guy at the next desk just for the sake of winning, that's a uniquely male thing.
It sounds a little like we're saying men are cold and women are emotional, which feels like a stereotype.
I think the sources would frame it more as men are abstract and women are contextual.
Okay.
It's not about emotion versus logic. It's about what kind of logic you apply. And this really comes to a head in decision-making.
Right.
There's a classic psychological test mentioned in the text, the pharmacist dilemma.
Oh, the Heinz dilemma. I remember this one. It's the morality test.
That's the one. So the scenario is, a man's wife is dying of cancer. There's one drug that can save her, but the pharmacist is charging 10 times what it costs to make. The husband can't afford it, he begs, but the pharmacist says no, so he breaks in and steals the drug. The question is, was he right or wrong?
And I'm guessing men and women answer this differently.
Drastically differently. And for a long time, psychologists actually thought the female answer was somehow less developed because it didn't fit their scale.
So what's the male approach?
The justice approach. They see it as a math problem. Life is worth more than property. Therefore, stealing is the logical solution. Boom. Done. Solved.
An abstract rule is applied. Next problem.
Exactly. But the female approach is the mercy or context approach. When you ask women this, they tend to reject the binary choice.
They don't just answer yes or no.
No, they ask more questions. Why can't he talk to the pharmacist again? Or can he borrow more money? If he goes to jail, who looks after his wife?
She's refusing to play by the abstract rules. She's looking for the relational fallout.
She's trying to negotiate the context. She sees a third way. Now, take that into a boardroom. The male manager says, sales are down, cut 10% of the staff. It's the rule. It's the math.
And the female manager says, hold on, let's look at who these people are. Can we reduce hours instead? How will this impact morale? Is that the guy who just had twins?
And there's the friction.
Yeah.
The male brain looks at her and says, she's indecisive. She can't make the hard call.
And she looks at him and says, he's reckless. He's destroying the culture. He doesn't see the full picture.
It's male justice versus female mercy. And for 100 years, the corporate world has been built on that male model. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Right. But the sources are arguing that by weeding out that mercy perspective, companies are making brittle, short-sighted decisions.
They optimize for the quarter, but they destroy the company culture for the decade.
This all leads us to the big one then, the glass ceiling. The sources present a really challenging argument here about the very top of the hierarchy. The CEOs, top surgeons, theoretical physicists. They say reaching that level requires a specific mental state they call monomania.
Monomania. It's the ability, or maybe the curse, to have this intense tunnel vision on a single goal to the exclusion of everything else.
Right. We talked about how the male brain is specialized. It can compartmentalize.
And the sources argue that to be the absolute best in a hyper-competitive field, you basically have to sacrifice your life.
Your health, your family, your weekends, your sleep. You're burning the furniture to heat the house.
Everything goes into the fire. And the high testosterone male brain, driven by that dominance hierarchy and the need for status, is often willing to make that trade. He will burn down his entire life to be king of the hill.
And the female brain looks at that deal and says, no, thank you.
The female brain, with its wider peripheral vision, that superhighway connecting all the different parts of life, it does the math on life satisfaction and decides the title just isn't worth losing her connections and her well-being.
So it's not a competence gap.
Not at all. The sources are absolutely emphatic about this. Women are just as smart, just as capable, often better managers because of that contextual thinking. But there is an ambition gap.
Or maybe a sanity gap.
Or a sanity gap, exactly. She isn't filtered out because she's weak. She filters herself out because she has a much broader definition of what success actually is.
But for a few decades there, especially in the 70s and 80s, the advice to women was basically, if you want to succeed, you have to be like him.
The era of male mimicry. And honestly, reading the sources, this is kind of one of the saddest parts.
Yeah.
Women were taught that to be equal, they had to be identical. You know, wear the power suit.
The big shoulder pad.
The big shoulder pads. Hide your emotions. Never, ever talk about your family. Be ruthless.
Be an honorary man.
Yes. And the sources argue this led to a generation of deeply unhappy women because they were spending 10 or 12 hours a day fighting their own biology.
Wow.
As the authors put it, they were failing at being men instead of succeeding at being women.
That is a heavy line, failing at being men. It implies that by using the male yardstick, women are always going to come up short, even if they're doing a great job.
It creates this permanent sense of inadequacy. If your natural strength is building consensus and reading the room, but you're forced to act like a blunt instrument because that's what leadership looks like, you're gonna be exhausted. You're swimming upstream against your own neurology.
So if we stop trying to be the same, what does the workplace look like? Because it seems like we're just missing out on a huge asset by devaluing the female brain.
That is the tragedy of the current system, according to the sources. We've set up the male mind as the gold standard for work. Aggression, single-mindedness, dominance.
But the modern world is complex. It's interconnected.
It requires communication and empathy more than ever, the very things the female brain specializes in.
Right.
The sources argue that by viewing female traits, nurturing, cooperation, intuition as soft skills or weaknesses, we're crippling our economy. We shouldn't be asking women to act like men. We should be asking, how can we structure organizations to let women lead like women?
So it's about reframing success. Maybe the goal isn't 50-50 representation in a boardroom that runs on testosterone rules.
Maybe the goal is a society that values the female contribution community, health, stability, just as much as it values the male contribution of conquest and expansion.
That's the misery of sameness the authors talk about.
Exactly. When we say different means unequal, we are essentially saying that being male is the only good way to be, and that's the ultimate sexism. True equality would be looking at the female operating system and saying, this is different and it is equally vital.
It really challenges you to look at your own career and your colleagues differently. Stop getting mad that they aren't like you and start seeing what they bring to the table that you don't.
It's the difference between a team of clones and a team of specialists. Clones are easy to manage, but specialists can actually handle a complex world.
So we've built the brain in the womb, we've watched it explode in puberty, seen it struggle in marriage, and now we've watched it navigate the office. It feels like we've covered the whole human experience.
We've covered the what and the why, but we haven't really talked about the future.
That's right. Where do we go from here? If biology is, if not destiny, at least a very strong suggestion, how do we build a world that actually fits us?
That is the big question.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought from the source material to mull over. The authors ask, if we stop trying to turn women into honorary men at work, would we actually have a more productive and happier economy?
It's a question that requires us to rethink everything we've been told about progress.
It certainly does. And that sets us up perfectly for our finale. Next time, in episode 12, we are wrapping up this entire series. We're going to look at the big picture and ask, is it time for a celebration of difference? You won't want to miss the conclusion. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.